to my channel. It's this time of year where we're coming into autumn and it's one of my favorite times, especially for baking. Now, before we get to Halloween content, at the end of the month it is Jewish New Year and I get loads of messages every year asking for the best honey cake recipe. We eat honey cake because we're welcoming the sweet new year, and I've decided to not just make any honey cake because I'm Georgia. I'm going to make a crazy honey cake. So I'm going to start with a honey sponge. Now, usually a honey cake is very light, very sweet, and it comes in like a loaf and you just eat it as a cake without any decoration or icing on because it's so sweet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adapt my own recipe and create something very pretty and unique, let's say. So I'm going to start with a sponge cake. Now, it's my normal sponge cake recipe. I'm just going to adapt it slightly. I'm starting off with my 250 grams of melted butter, and it is unsalted. And rather than putting caster sugar, which I usually do, I'm actually using light brown sugar, and it works in my recipe just the same. So I'm going to put that straight into the bowl. Now, I only have 200 grams here because I'm going to add more sweetness with some honey. So I'm just going to mix in the sugar using a whisk. And once it's mixed in, it comes together in like a thick paste. And now I'm going to add a little bit more sweetness. Now, obviously, because it's a honey cake, I'm using some honey. My honey actually crystallized a bit, so I've been keeping it in some hot water, which makes it nice and loose again. So that's a little trick for you. And I'm going to add in a couple of tablespoons. So the main sweetness will come from the sugar, but it's nice to just put a bit of honey in for flavor. Now, traditionally, honey cakes are actually made with golden syrup. Well, at least the recipe that I have. So it's nice to actually put some honey in the cake, if it's a honey cake. And what I'm going to do is a bit unusual, but I'm going to put in some black treacle. So it's basically molasses. And I find it just gives it a slightly richer and darker flavour. I'm only going to go in with a heaped teaspoon. And I'm going to mix the honey and treacle in with the butter and sugar. So now I'm going to add the eggs. I've started to do a little trick. I actually crack my eggs into a jar, and rather than break them up in a bowl, I just give them a shake. And that breaks the eggs up for you. How easy is that? Mix that in. Now, because we've melted butter, people ask me if it's okay to replace the butter with oil, and yes, it is. I prefer cooking with butter because I think it has a nicer flavour. It's got a strong flavour within a cake, so if you cook with oil, you get rid of that flavour basically. And once that is all mixed in, I can go in with the flour. Now, I've got some self-raising flour here, so it's already got the baking agent in it. And before I empty it into the pan, I'm going to flavour it with some cinnamon and some ginger. It's just that time of year where you start using spices in cooking, and I just think it really complements the honey flavouring. So a teaspoon of cinnamon and a teaspoon of ginger. And, like in all my cakes, a little pinch of my vanilla powder. And if you don't know what vanilla powder is, you can go and check my YouTube tutorial all about vanilla, which I'll put a link up here for you. So I'm just going to gently mix the spices into the flour, and then this can go directly into the pan. And gently bring this together. That looks absolutely delicious and smells divine. I'm just going to swap the whisk for a spatula just so I can scrape out every last bit of batter. Give it a good mix around to make sure that all the ingredients are combined. And now I can get my cake tins, which I have greased and lined bottom and sides, otherwise your cake sticks. And I'm going to measure the batter into each of the tins. And there we go, cake batter done. How easy was that? All in one pot. I'm going to cook it for about 45 minutes, checking it after 35 minutes and giving it a rotation at 180 degrees. If you're finding your ovens are too hot, reduce the temperature by 5 degrees. So I actually set mine to 175 because of my oven thermometer reads 180 when I do that. So get yourself an oven thermometer and know your oven. So the sponge cakes are baking, and I always make my cake the day before I decorate it. So I'm going to be decorating the cake tomorrow, and I'm going to show you something else that should also be done in advance. It's royal icing decorations. Basically, we're going to make some decorations and then leave them to set overnight so they're rock hard, and then it's literally a case of like picking them up and placing them on the cake. And all you need is 200 grams of icing sugar and an egg white and a whisk, basically. So the icing sugar can go straight into a mixer bowl. Don't you just love an icing sugar cloud? And in goes an egg white. Now this is one of the rare recipes that I don't actually weigh the egg white, because you can adapt depending on the consistency of the royal icing. So I'm going to leave that to whisk, and if it's too thin, I might add a little bit more icing sugar, and if it's too thick, I can add a little bit of lemon juice. But I basically start this off slow, so the icing sugar doesn't go all in your face, and then give it a good whisk for about 5 minutes, and it should come together in like a thick icing, which is pipeable, and that's very important. So after 5 minutes, the royal icing, it kind of looks like meringue. Well, it essentially is. It's egg white and icing sugar. Now this is thick, but it does still have some movement in it. If it's too thick, you won't be able to pipe, and we're going to do some piping. So this is a perfect consistency. So what I'm going to do is leave some of it white, because I'm going to do more white decorations, and then colour, because what is a honey cake without some little bees on it? So I'm going to colour a couple of tablespoons black and yellow and create some little bees with it. Now what I'm going to do with the leftover white is put it into a piping bag, and this has a number 3 tip. So I'm going to fill that up with white and close that up. What you have to bear in mind is that royal icing hardens very quickly. And I'm going to put the black with a number 2 tip and the yellow with a number 4 tip, because that's going to be the bees' bodies. So to pipe your decorations, what you need is some acetate. And what I've done, I've actually printed off a honeycomb pattern, which I'm going to trace on, and put the acetate paper on the top. And then with some tape, just secure the corners so it doesn't move around. I'm going to trace over the honeycomb pattern, and basically once it's all done, you leave it to dry, it will harden, and then like I said before, you literally lift it up and it'll be a solid piece. So, a little bit of a wrist workout, but it's looking really effective, and I've actually printed smaller patterns as well, so I'm just going to do a few patches of them just so there's a little bit of difference amongst the cake. So the smaller honeycomb is actually a little bit more difficult to get the definition, but I've done a little patch just in case. And what you'll be able to see is that when I lift up the acetate, you can see the pattern is directly transferred onto there. And royal icing is just an amazing way to get any theme onto a cake, because you can pipe any decoration. If you don't want to use a template and go freehand, like I'm going to do with the bees, you don't need the template, you just need a piece of acetate, but I will secure it to the surface. And now I'm going to pipe little bees. So I'm going to start off with an oval shape of yellow. You don't want it too fat because it may not dry. So I'm going to keep them quite flat. So like I said, I've put the black icing in a number 2, which is one of the finer tips, because I'm going to do some black stripes on the bees. And I'm going to give them a little eye. So I've done the bodies, the stripes, and now for the wings. So I'm going to use the white and just pipe 2 little circles above each bee. And there you have some cute little bees. So with the honeycomb and the bee decorations, I'm literally just going to leave them out in the open for them to air dry. They only need a few hours, but I always just leave it overnight just to be safe. So I'm going to leave these to the side and check on my sponge cakes. So the sponge cakes are done, and I wish you can smell what I'm smelling right now. The combination of honey and ginger and the little bit of treacle is literally making my mouth water. It smells delicious. I'm going to leave them to completely cool and then wrap them in cling film and use them tomorrow. And then I'm going to get on with the decoration, so we'll see you in the morning. Day 2, my decorations from yesterday have completely set and my sponge cakes are nice and cooled. Now, one last element of the cake that I'm gonna make before I build it up is honeycomb. Now, it's not actually made of honey, but with the theme of things, I thought it would be a nice touch to add it to the cake. And it's super easy to make. So I've basically got golden syrup in a pan here, and all I'm going to do is add in the caster sugar. And I'm going to give it a mix before I turn on the heat, because you don't really want to mix it while it's heating up. So I've mixed it in. It's quite thick, but as we heat it, it's going to loosen up. So I'm just going to get it heating. And you want to heat it until 145 degrees when it's going to be a nice amber color. So I do have a thermometer here, but I'm going to go mainly on the color of it as well as the thermometer. And what I have at hand is the bicarbonate of soda and a lined baking tray or some sort of heat-proof container like this, already ready, because once you add the bicarbonate of soda, it's very quick until it needs to go into here. So just be aware of the timings. So once all the sugar has dissolved into the caramel, now is the time to really leave it and just check the temperature. So it's nearly at 145, a really lovely amber colour. Now I'll do my best to kind of show you on both cameras, but I am going to be busy making the honeycomb. So once you are happy with the colour and it has reached the temperature, I'm going to take it off the heat and then quickly, all at once, add my bicarbonate of soda. Hopefully, you'll be able to see on the side camera how much it bubbles up. And straight into the pot. Don't get scared, but it will still grow in the pot. It might overflow. Control it a bit. Ooh. I always underestimate how much it flows. Ideally, you shouldn't do what I'm doing, but it was about to go everywhere. But eventually it slows down and then it hardens and then you get that delicious honeycomb. That looks good. And so you want to leave that how it is for at least an hour, just for it to completely set. Okay, so it's nearly time to decorate the honey cake. I have the honeycomb setting, and what I've done here is I've whisked up my Swiss meringue in preparation to make my Swiss meringue buttercream, which I am gonna flavour, of course, with honey. So it's simply heating sugar and egg white over a bain-marie till 63 degrees and then whisking it till meringue stage and leaving it to cool. I have a whole tutorial on my channel about how you make Swiss meringue buttercream, so I'll only show you the last half of it. But I'm going to prepare my sponge cakes by slicing them into 4 even layers and giving them a nice soaking. So I'm just going to very gently cut an even layer off the top like I usually do. And it's got this beautiful brown colour, and as usual you could do whatever you want with these, but I'm literally salivating and I have to just try some right now. That is delicious, and I can taste the ginger as well, and it really enhances the honey flavour. So I'm going to use the first half to guide me for the second half, so I get nice even layers. And you can see it's darker than my normal sponges, and that's because of the added treacle and spices. Now I'm going to divide each of these into half. So I've got 4 even flat layers of cake ready to be coated, but before I do that, I'm just going to give them a very light soaking with sugar syrup. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, like, you're adding sugar syrup to a honey cake, isn't it sweet enough? It is. The sugar syrup is so the cake lasts longer. So if you're making it 3-4 days in advance, the sugar syrup stops it going dry. Now I can actually feel this is quite a moist cake, so I probably don't need the sugar syrup, but I'm going to put a little bit on just in case. So I'm just going to leave that to the side until we decorate the cake. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes until the meringue is nice and cold before I add the butter. Right, meringue is cold, so I'm going to add the butter in piece by piece. So I've got softened, unsalted butter here. Start this on a slow speed. Just let the meringue come together first, and then I'm going to add the butter. Now once all the butter's in, I'm going to increase the speed very slightly and watch until it kind of curdles and comes together as the buttercream. So once the buttercream has come together, you can now flavour it. So now you can leave it vanilla or plain, but I'm going to put a little bit of honey just to continue the theme of honey cake. So when people ask me how to flavour my Swiss meringue buttercream, I literally just say put the flavour in. So I've got some honey and I'm going to squirt about 2 tablespoons. It's going to be sweet anyway, so I'm not going to completely overpower it, but just 2 tablespoons of honey will just give it that nice honey kick to it. So just one last scrape down. So I have a large piping bag here in a vase to help me fill it. Just going to fill the bag with the buttercream. And now we are ready to fill the cake. So all ready for decorating. I've got my turntable, my cake card, a little wet cloth underneath, my soaked sponge cake and the buttercream ready to go. But I'm just going to go over to my honeycomb, which has been setting, and as you can hear, it's rock hard. So it's been setting for about 2 hours and this is the stage you want it. Oh my God, this is literally like my heaven. So you can only do this when it's completely solid. So I'm actually going to turn it upside down and smash it to pieces using a rolling pin. And without making too much mess, you get these amazing chunks of honeycomb, and it's the very middle aerated bit that is what I'm going to fill the cake with. So you should be able to just kind of break it apart, and that's going to be sitting in the cake, and I'm going to have to try some. Oh, now I can't talk. Okay, let's get decorating. First things first, as usual, I'm going to put a bit of buttercream on the board and go on with my first cake layer this way up. So I'm using one of the layers that had touched the cake tin because it's nice and flat. And now I'm going to pipe an even layer of the buttercream and spread it out flat. And now I'm going to get some chunks of honeycomb. Now you obviously just saw me eat and I couldn't really talk, but the buttercream will soften the honeycomb slightly, so it won't be too difficult to eat and just give an amazing flavour. That looks amazing and I can't wait to eat this. And I'm basically going to put 3 blobs of buttercream because that will let the next layer of sponge cake stick to it, because otherwise it just goes directly on the honeycomb. So now I'm just using one of the top halves, press it down and repeat until I get to the top layer. So always remember the flat side up when it comes to the last layer of cake. And now I'm going to crumb coat it, but first I'm going to fill the gaps in between the layers just to make sure all that buttercream is filling any holes and that honeycomb isn't going to spill out. So I'm just flattening off the top. Now I get my side scraper and scrape around the sides and remove all the excess buttercream. And now I'm going to clean off the corners. Angle the palette knife and bring it inwards. So just remember, the crumb coating never has to be perfect because you're going over with that second layer. You can leave it like this and have a more naked cake if you want, but I'm going to be putting stripes on it. So I'm going to put this in the fridge for about half an hour. If you have a freezer big enough, you could put it in the freezer for about 10 minutes until the buttercream is nice and firm. Right, so the crumb coat is nice and firm, which means we can go on with the second layer. I'm going to do stripes, so I've left some of the buttercream white and I've coloured some of it yellow. And I've put them in 2 separate piping bags, and I'm going to pipe stripes all the way up the sides of the cake. And when I get to the top, I just fill the top with whatever colour I've landed on. In this case, it's yellow. And now with my palette knife, I'm going to spread the top of the cake nice and even. And now use my scraper to scrape the sides. And the stripes should blend into each other. So once you're happy with the sides, now you can clean off the corners. Now if you want, you can put this in the freezer, let the buttercream harden, and then get a really nice sharp edge. But because I'm going to add drips to it, I don't think that matters that much. So I'm going to do it when the buttercream is still soft. So once you're happy with the second covering, you can now decorate the cake however you like, but obviously I'm going to use the decorations that I made yesterday, and I've got some salted caramel popcorn and some dried apples, and I'm going to do some drips in caramel, which means the cake has to be cold. So I'm going to pop this back in the freezer for 5 minutes and prepare my caramel for dripping. So I have just warmed up some of my salted caramel sauce, which I'm going to drip down the sides, and I find it easier to drip this from a piping bag. And this is important to have the cake nice and cold, otherwise the caramel just keeps dripping. I've also put the leftover yellow and white buttercream into a piping bag with a small star nozzle, and I'm just going to pipe a few shapes on the top. And this is also what the decorations are going to stick to. And now I've got a selection of toppings. So I have some macarons, some of my salted caramel popcorn. I've also dehydrated some apple slices. Reason being is because it's very traditional on Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, to dip apple in honey. And then I have the royal icing decorations that I made yesterday. So you can see that the bees, for example, whoops, one's just already come off, but they come off completely, and I can stick them wherever I want. Now, what I noticed that after I had left the honeycomb drying, the larger honeycomb was actually starting to break. So I ended up filling it in with some yellow, like this one here, and I did another one in black, just to give it some more support. But just the same, if I lift it off the acetate, it is one piece, and that just looks really effective. So I'm going to break some up of there. This is one of the outlines that I did, which still looks effective, and I might put small amounts on it, but I really like the two-tone effect. So now it's time to finish off the cake. I'm going to start with a couple of macarons, and maybe one down here, and a few clumps of my salted caramel popcorn. And now I'm going to fill the gaps using some of the apple slices, because they fit in really nicely. And to make these, I just slice them really thinly and then set the oven at 100 degrees Celsius and dry them out for about an hour, hour and a half, until they curl up. Now I'm going to go in with some honeycomb. So I'm just going to break this and kind of do little shards sticking out. And last but not least, my friendly little bees. And to top it off, some edible gold glitter. So there we have my ridiculously overcomplicated honey cake. I say that because normal honey cakes are not decorated at all. So this is a little step up from that. We've got the royal icing decorations, the honeycomb on the inside, and all these lovely decorations on top. Give it a go, it's really enjoyable and delicious. I've put all the quantities below so you can try out all my recipes. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel because lots more tutorials are coming up. And for those who are Jewish and celebrating Jewish New Year, have a happy and sweet New Year. And if you're not, then eat honey cake anyway because it's delicious. Hope you enjoyed it and I will see you very soon.